All right, let's talk about disco.
Hmm.
You know, the music, the fashion, that whole scene.
Yeah.
Okay, so imagine this. You're at a baseball game, the Chicago White Sox,
Huh?
expecting, a good old American pastime,
Right.
but instead of peanuts and Cracker Jack,
Hmm.
you're surrounded by fans.
Hmm.
Not cheering, but like destroying disco records.
Wow.
Sounds crazy, right? Like a movie or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, this was real. This happened back in 1979, and it became known as Disco Demolition Night.
Yeah, it's an event that's been analyzed and debated for decades now.
It has, and we are going to dive deep into this story today. We're using excerpts from a History Daily podcast episode, and we'll uncover, how this all happened.
Right.
The key players, the impact, not just on baseball, but like music and culture as a whole.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
And you might be surprised to learn that a disgruntled radio DJ had a big role in all this.
Yeah, that's right. A DJ named Steve Dahl. So back then, 1979, disco was huge. It was everywhere.
Yeah, it was dominating the airwaves.
That's right, but not everyone was into it. And Dahl, a Chicago DJ, well, he was known for really disliking disco.
This wasn't just like a mild dislike either, right?
No, it was like a full-on rage against disco. He'd go on the air and just rant about it, scratch up disco records. He even, went as far as to celebrate when a disco artist died.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. His whole anti-disco crusade kind of took off after he got fired from a rock station that decided to just switch over and play all disco.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so he found himself at a news station, WLUP, and he really used it as a platform to rally his listeners. He called them co-hosts to join in this, anti-disco movement.
And these co-hosts weren't just passive listeners either, right?
Oh, no. They were very active, staged protests, went and disrupted disco events, basically making life difficult for anyone who liked disco.
It's a reminder of how music can really sometimes tap into these deeper cultural anxieties or something, right?
Yeah, for sure. Disco, with its origins in Black and Latinx communities, it was kind of seen by some as this threat to the establishment,
I see. And speaking of establishments, let's bring in the Chicago White Sox.
Right.
They were having some trouble, filling seats at Comiskey Park.
Right.
And their marketing director, Mike Veek, well, he was known for his promotional ideas.
It's putting it mildly.
Yeah, unconventional, let's say that.
Yeah, he had actually tried a disco-themed night a couple of years before, and it failed miserably.
Oh, that's funny.
But this time he kind of saw an opportunity in this whole anti-disco thing that was going on. Maybe he thought tapping into this could bring in some fans.
Yeah, like reverse psychology almost.
Exactly.
So they come up with this idea, Disco Demolition Night.
Uh-huh.
So fans could get, cheaper tickets if they brought a disco record to be destroyed.
Sounds kind of crazy now, right?
Yeah.
Looking back, it's pretty clear they totally underestimated how intense these anti-disco feelings were.
It's easy to judge now, but at the time, disco was a huge thing. And like any trend, it was going to have its, backlash.
Yeah, for sure.
They probably just saw it as a way to, capitalize on that. All right, so July 12th, 1979 arrives.
Okay.
And Comiskey Park, it is packed, totally packed.
Really?
Yeah, like triple the usual attendance.
Yeah.
Just a sea of people, many of them, Dahl's co-hosts,
Right.
carrying all those disco records ready to be destroyed.
Oh, man. I can only imagine the energy.
It's intense, and you can almost feel it building as the first game, it goes on. Fans are throwing these records onto the field. Security is overwhelmed. There's just this sense that something big is about to happen.
Yeah.
And boom. Between games, Steve Dahl. He's wearing a helmet and riding on top of a Jeep.
Oh, wow.
And he leads the crowd in this chant, "Disco sucks."
He did not.
Yeah, and then he blows up a crate full of these disco records.
And that's when things really went off the rails, right? I mean, the destruction of those records, it seemed to just unleash this wave of frustration, and what was supposed to be, this fun promotion just descends into a total riot.
It did. A full-blown riot.
Oh.
So, yeah, things get pretty crazy after that.
So we left off with things getting a little wild at Comiskey Park.
Yeah, a little wild.
I mean, the crowd had just seen this, crate of disco records explode.
Yeah.
And it felt like things were really about to go off the rails.
Well, they did.
They did.
Like, from what I've read, fans just stormed the field, tearing stuff up, lighting fires.
Yeah.
It sounds like a scene from like a dystopian movie or something.
Yeah, it was total chaos. The field was completely overrun, people vandalizing property, security completely overwhelmed.
Wow.
Yeah, they had no choice but to call in riot police
Riot police. Wow.
just to try to get things under control.
So what happened after that? Like once things calmed down, what were the consequences of this whole thing?
So apart from the damage to the stadium and all the arrests,
Right.
the White Sox had to forfeit the second game of the doubleheader.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the incident made national news, obviously, and it sparked all these debates about, mob mentality and the role of the media, inciting violence and the cultural significance of disco itself.
Yeah, I bet this didn't help the White Sox's image at all.
Nah, not really. They faced a lot of criticism for putting this event on in the first place. A lot of people saw it as, a reckless publicity stunt that just totally backfired.
It's funny, though, how this event, it was obviously chaotic and destructive, but it's also become this weird sort of cultural touchstone.
Right.
Like people still talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's referenced in discussions about music, social trends, even like marketing and promotion.
Yeah, I think it's because it really captures a specific moment in time, It reflects the anxieties and tensions of the late 70s.
The late 70s, yeah.
Like you said, you had economic uncertainty, political turmoil, and then you had disco, this music that some people saw as just frivolous and excessive, especially, with all this other stuff going on in the world.
Yeah, and disco wasn't just music.
No, it was a whole subculture, a way of life.
Yeah.
It was the nightclubs, the dancing, the fashion, this whole kind of freedom that not everybody was into.
And let's not forget that disco was largely driven by Black and Latinx artists.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some people argue that a lot of that anti-disco sentiment had racial undertones, like prejudice and resentment.
For sure. I mean, not everyone who disliked disco was racist, but the event definitely played into those existing racial tensions.
Right.
Some people just felt threatened by the rise of disco culture.
So it makes sense.
Challenging the norms and amplifying the voices of marginalized communities.
So this event that seemed like it was just about music was really tapping into all these bigger social anxieties and cultural clashes.
Exactly. It became this symbolic battleground.
Wow.
For all these different forces, musical tastes, cultural values, racial anxieties.
Yeah.
I think that's why it still resonates with people today.
Right.
Even those who weren't alive back then.
Yeah, so there's this question that always comes up.
Yeah.
Did Disco Demolition Night actually kill disco? Because, disco was huge in the 70s.
Right.
But it really seemed to just fade away after that.
It's tempting to connect the two, but it's probably more accurate to say that disco was already on its way out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like any musical genre, it had its peak, and by 79, there were signs that things were slowing down.
So almost like a bubble that was about to burst.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
There was this feeling that disco had just become too commercialized.
Yeah.
Too formulaic.
I can see that.
But that doesn't take away from the symbolic power of Disco Demolition Night. I mean, the images of those records being blown up, the whole spectacle of it, it definitely captured that growing backlash.
Almost like a ritualistic exorcism of this genre that had become this, lightning rod for all this cultural anxiety.
Yeah, and even though disco faded from the mainstream, it didn't disappear completely.
Oh, okay.
It went underground and evolved into new forms like house music and techno.
Wow.
And its influence can still be heard in pop music today.
So it's like disco went through this metamorphosis, shedding its 70s image, but keeping its core elements, like the driving beats and the focus on dancing.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I mean, disco may have been declared dead at Comiskey Park.
Right.
But its spirit lived on, transforming and adapting. And it continues to influence music and culture to this day.
We've been talking about Disco Demolition Night and, its impact on music and culture. But what about Mike Veeck?
Yeah, the guy behind it all.
Yeah, the White Sox marketing director. We know he got fired after that riot, but what happened after that?
Well, he didn't fade away. Veeck was always good at getting attention.
Right.
And his career didn't end with the White Sox. He actually went on to own a bunch of minor league teams.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he was still known for those crazy promotions.
So he kind of kept doing his thing just on a smaller scale.
Exactly. He never shied away from controversy either. At one point, he even staged a nobody night.
A nobody night?
Yeah. He closed the stadium gates and didn't let anyone in.
He didn't. What for?
Just to see what would happen.
Wow. So what about disco? Did he ever talk about his role in Disco Demolition Night?
Well, here's the interesting part. In 2014, he actually decided to kind of redo the whole disco demolition thing.
He did?
Yeah, but with a twist. This time he was the owner of the Charleston River Dogs.
A minor league team.
Right. And instead of disco, he decided to target Justin Bieber and Miley Cyrus.
Hold on, so he had like a disco demolition too, but they destroyed Bieber and Cyrus stuff?
Pretty much.
What was he thinking?
It seemed like he was going for a more, I don't know, lighthearted thing this time.
Oh.
It was called A Tribute to Music That Time Forgot, and fans were encouraged to bring, Bieber and Cyrus stuff to be destroyed.
And so, was it another riot?
No, not at all. It was actually a big success.
It was.
Yeah, but in a different way. People were cheering as the stuff was being destroyed.
So he was trying to take it back and make it fun.
Maybe, or maybe he was just trying to get publicity for his team like he always did.
So why Bieber and Cyrus?
Well, they were both really popular at the time, but also really polarizing. So it was kind of like the original Disco Demolition, a generational divide, a clash of musical tastes, but, this time it was more tongue-in-cheek.
It's crazy how things that were once controversial can just become, like, nostalgic.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that Vic was able to kind of pull this off again, even in a different context, it shows how much things change.
They do.
So what are some things our listeners should keep in mind about all this?
Yeah, good question. I think it's a reminder that even these events that seem, small or silly can reflect bigger things happening in society.
For sure.
And also that music can be really powerful.
Yeah, for good and bad.
And how easily, entertainment gets mixed up with politics and identity and social change.
Absolutely.
It also makes you think about how things change over time.
Right.
How what's shocking to one generation could be funny to another. It can. So the next time you hear a disco song or see a picture of those burning records at Comiskey Park, remember that there's a whole lot more to the story.
Yeah, it's about cultural clashes, the power of music, and how unpredictable history can be.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up our deep dive into Disco Demolition Night.
Thanks for listening.
We hope you enjoyed it.